In the next few minutes, you will be led into knowledge carved from the darkest corners of human endurance. This is not a comfortable lesson, nor is it confined to the safe walls of classrooms and theories. What we are about to examine was uncovered in the frozen labor camps of the Soviet Union, where hunger, despair, and betrayal stripped human relationships down to their barest truth. The men who lived through this ordeal discovered a consistent pattern, a revelation about love and loyalty that shatters comforting illusions. This is what I will call the Solzhenitsyn Secret. It is less a story of history and more a mirror, showing you what still governs human relationships today. For centuries, thinkers from Aristotle to Rousseau speculated about women, loyalty, and affection, often from armchairs and ivory towers. Their conclusions were clever but abstract. Yet the gulags became the harshest laboratory ever devised. Millions of men, dragged away by the NKVD for a word or a glance, were forced into a silent experiment. They became the test subjects, and their wives, lovers, and families became the unknowing variables. Solzhenitsyn wrote, "The line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being." In the Gulag, the same could be said about love. There, the boundary between loyalty and abandonment was tested without mercy. Consider the young engineer, Yevgeny, full of promise until he was seized in the night and condemned on absurd charges. Shipped north into the Arctic, his world reduced to a ration of bread in the memory of his wife, Anna. For months, he wrote letters drenched in devotion, believing her love would anchor him. Then came the letter he dreaded, but never expected, a divorce notice, accompanied by a few short lines. "Forgive me. I must think of my life now. I have remarried." Solzhenitsyn documented countless cases like his. Men destroyed not by bullets but by a wife's ink on paper. The pattern that emerged became the first law of the Solzhenitsyn Secret. The likelihood of abandonment rises when loyalty becomes too costly. Love is not infinite. It functions like a currency. And when a man's status, power, or capacity to provide collapses, most of that currency evaporates. Nietzsche once observed that love is not consolation, it is light. Yet in the Gulag, the light of love often flickered out the moment the warmth of status was extinguished. This may sound cruel, but cruelty is not the heart of it. What was revealed is an evolutionary reality. Women, as carriers of life, are designed to seek survival and security above all else. Strip a man of his ability to protect or provide, and most women, however kind once, will shift. Yevgeny was no longer a husband in Anna's eyes, but a convict, a dead end, a risk. She was not simply betraying him, she was saving herself. The lesson is cold but clear. You are not abandoned because of who you are, but because of what you have ceased to represent in the hierarchy of survival. And yet, in the Gulag's icy wasteland, there were rare exceptions. Women who did not bend, who walked into exile alongside their men, earning the name Decembrist wives. Their stories, too, hold a law of their own. Among the ruins of faith and the avalanche of desertions, there were a handful of women who stood out as anomalies. Women whose loyalty defied not only biology, but also reason itself. History remembers them as the Decembrist wives, named after those noble women in the 19th century who followed their exiled husbands into Siberia after the failed uprising of 1825. Solzhenitsyn noted them with awe, for they were as rare as diamonds buried in ash. They not only refused to sever ties, but uprooted themselves entirely, relocating to remote towns, enduring squalor, and fighting tirelessly for the survival of their men. These women carried food parcels across thousands of miles, braved bureaucratic labyrinths, and waited in endless lines for the smallest chance to deliver a few potatoes or a lump of sugar that could mean the difference between death and endurance. Their loyalty was not passive sentiment. It was action, discipline, and defiance. In a society that demanded conformity, they refused. In a world where survival dictated abandonment, they chose resistance. Solzhenitsyn himself saw it in his first wife, Natalia. At first, she held firm, writing letters, sending provisions, holding the line of loyalty. Yet after years of relentless pressure and the erosion of hope, she finally yielded and filed for divorce. Even so, in a twist few could have predicted, she sought him out again after his release. And for a time, they reunited. Her story was neither pure betrayal nor pure loyalty. It was the messy, conflicted truth of human love under crushing circumstances. Here lies the second law of the Solzhenitsyn Secret. Unconditional loyalty is not the norm. It is the historical exception, born of rare character and fierce independence. You cannot demand it, nor can you predict it. If you are fortunate enough to find it, you must cherish it with gratitude. But to build your life expecting it is to gamble against overwhelming odds. Schopenhauer warned that marriage is a debt contracted in youth and paid in old age. But in the Gulag, many men discovered that their partners defaulted long before the final payment was due. What separated an Anna from a Natalia? What forged a Decembrist wife? Often it was not social upbringing, but something deeper. An inner defiance of society itself, a love rooted in character rather than circumstance. Sometimes even a spiritual or ideological devotion that refused to bend. These women saw their men not as the world branded them, criminals, traitors, pariahs, but as the men they knew before the wire. Their loyalty was not to status, but to essence. And yet, even these extraordinary figures remind us of the rule, not the exception. The Gulag's archive of broken men tells us plainly, betting your life on finding such loyalty is like wagering against the house in a casino designed to strip you bare. The odds are mercilessly stacked. To ignore this reality is not noble. It is reckless. But this story is not confined to Siberian snow. The Gulag is simply the starkest magnifying glass of a truth that plays out daily in ordinary homes. A lost job, a sickness, the slow erosion of a man's strength. These are the modern equivalents of exile and conviction. And just as in the camps, the withdrawal of affection, the cooling of respect, the whispered rationalizations follow the same pattern. The betrayal may not arrive on official paper. It may come as indifference, contempt, or the quiet words. I love you, but I'm not in love with you. To see this truth is to strip away illusions, but it is not the end of the story. Because in the Gulag, some men, faced with the ultimate collapse, discovered not only despair, but a terrifying new source of strength. The question is not whether betrayal happens, but what a man does after it strikes. For the men who received those letters of abandonment, life split in two directions. Some, like Yevgeny, surrendered to despair. They stopped eating, stopped resisting the cold, and allowed the betrayal to finish what the camp had started. But others, rarer and stronger, transformed that same shock into the foundation of a new, indestructible identity. Solzhenitsyn called this process ascending. It was nothing less than the forging of a different kind of man. Imagine the moment a prisoner opens an envelope, and with a few lines of handwriting, his last tether to the world outside is severed. He feels the collapse of hope, the death of his old self. Yet instead of breaking, he accepts it. He whispers to himself, "So this is how the world truly is." In that instant, he swallows the black pill not as poison, but as bitter medicine. He realizes that his worth was never in the hands of another. It was always waiting to be created within. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." In the Gulag, this was no philosophy, it was survival. Take the story of Dmitri, a historian imprisoned for ideological deviation. His fiancée left him for a man in the very secret police who condemned him. For 2 days, he lay paralyzed by grief. On the third, something changed. He reframed the betrayal. She has not betrayed me. She has revealed herself. Better I learn this truth now than after I built a family with her. What might seem like a cruel twist, he turned into a brutal gift. From that moment, his prison was not a sentence. It was a university. Every act of cruelty became a lesson. Every betrayal, a case study. He understood what Nietzsche meant when he said, "To live is to suffer. To survive is to find meaning in the suffering." These survivors practiced a kind of mental alchemy. They stripped away all dependence on external validation. Letters, affection, status, and replaced it with a ruthless focus on what they could control. The next swing of the hammer, the next breath, the next heartbeat. Hope no longer meant reunion or rescue. Hope meant endurance in the present moment. This microscopic focus shrank impossible years into bearable minutes. And those minutes became survival. Discipline was their weapon. After days of crushing labor, some men would carefully pick lice from their clothes, not to eradicate them, but as an assertion of order against chaos. Others recited poetry, memorized pages of Pushkin or Dante, or solved mathematical problems in their heads. These rituals had no practical use. They were declarations of sovereignty. You may command my body, but not my soul. The modern equivalent is no different. A man lifting weights when he wants to collapse, reading instead of scrolling, or rising early to work on his craft is picking his lice. These acts look small, but they build the fortress of self-respect brick by brick. And then came purpose. For some, it was to document what they witnessed, to remember names and dates so the world could not forget. Solzhenitsyn himself began composing what became the Gulag archipelago while still imprisoned, using matchsticks as memory aids. For him, the camp was no longer only suffering. It was data, fuel, a sacred mission. Others made their purpose the preservation of dignity, or simply the mastery of their own will. What mattered was that their mission could not be taken away by betrayal, divorce, or the state. This is the essence of the forging, turning betrayal into clarity, turning loss into strength, turning dependence into sovereignty. Those who learned this emerged scarred but unbroken, eyes holding a depth that unsettled others. They had stared into the abyss and found within themselves a foundation no one else could touch. When the camps finally opened their gates, the men who stepped out were unrecognizable to those who had once known them. Their bodies were gaunt, their faces lined. Yet in their eyes burned something immeasurable. They had faced the collapse of love, the withdrawal of every external anchor, and in that void had forged a truth that no betrayal could extinguish. They understood what Viktor Frankl, himself a survivor of another hell, would later declare: those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. For the survivors, that why was no longer the hope of reunion, no longer the validation of a woman's affection, but the preservation of their own integrity and the pursuit of a mission that transcended their private grief. Some, like Solzhenitsyn, turned their agony into testimony. Others built lives centered not on needing love, but on giving it freely, without the chains of dependency. Their love, when it returned, was no longer fragile. It was offered as a gift, not a bargaining chip, because they had nothing left to lose. Here lies the paradoxical gift of the Solzhenitsyn Secret. By accepting the conditional nature of loyalty, a man can finally love without fear. He no longer demands permanence from what is fleeting. He no longer builds his life on another's validation. Instead, he builds a cathedral of purpose. His craft, his work, his discipline, his children if he has them. And within that structure, the loyalty of a woman, if it appears, is welcomed as a blessing but never mistaken for the foundation. This is the same choice that confronts men today. The wire may not be steel and frost, but it is real, woven from expectations, romantic illusions, and the desperate need to be loved in order to feel whole. When the thread snaps, through betrayal, divorce, or quiet disrespect, most men bleed out because their hope was tied to something fragile. The survivors of the Gulag teach us a different path. Cut the wire yourself before it cuts you. Transfer your hope from her affection to your mission. Build rituals of discipline that declare sovereignty in the face of chaos. Reframe betrayal as instruction, not damnation. The modern man betrayed by indifference at a dinner table or a sudden text message must see himself as Dmitri did. Not a victim of cruelty, but a student of truth. Each wound is not the end of the story, but a lesson chiseling him into someone unbreakable. His response determines whether he collapses like Yevgeny or ascends like Solzhenitsyn. To borrow from Marcus Aurelius again, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. So ask yourself, what stands in your way now? A failed relationship, a fading love, a betrayal that cut you deeper than any blade. Do not wait for it to heal you. It will not. Do not wait for her to return. She may not. Instead, take the lesson as the prisoners once did. Forge yourself in the fire of loss. Build a mission that no one can strip from you. And when love comes again, accept it not as a necessity, but as a gift. The Solzhenitsyn Secret does not end in despair. It ends in sovereignty. The men who stared at betrayal and walked out stronger remind you that freedom begins when you stop pleading for loyalty and start creating strength. Cut the wire. Step beyond it. Your mission awaits.